A group of 75 lawyers says it may have to take legal action to stop the end-of-life choice bill, saying its loose criteria leaves vulnerable people open to coercion. Lawyers for Vulnerable New Zealanders says there's no guarantee the proposed law will only apply to terminally ill people. Its spokesperson, Dr. Huhana Hickey, is a legal academic and has multiple sclerosis. She says the group that launched today is concerned for the elderly, the lonely and especially Māori.
Many disabled Māori are a part of the problem where they're trying to access healthcare but often cannot due to the institutionalised racism we experience. You're putting poor people, people at risk, into a position where they may end up having no choice other than to choose euthanasia because Pharmac refused to fund their drugs, others refuse to give them care, and we have a very underfunded palliative care system. Those are the people we've got a problem with. There are three aspects of this bill which are a big problem for us, and that is coercion, cover-up and criteria. Those are the three areas that we've identified as being problematic in this bill.
Well, let's address some of those points, because David Seymour says that this bill ultimately will only be available to those people who are terminally ill, who have 6 months or less to live, that they are removing the clause that refers to deteriorating conditions, irremediable medical conditions and grievous medical conditions. He says that's going.
Well, first up, the Select Committee have said they cannot come to an agreement on this bill, which means it's problematic. They have not agreed to any changes. They have not agreed to make those provisions that he's identified.
So you don't trust his word on that?
No, I don't. David Seymour's own record, I don't trust his word on much these days. And I mean, he says one thing and then goes and does another, but he has never addressed the issue around underfunding of palliative care. He's never addressed the issue around racism within the health sector. He's never addressed the issue around disabled trying to access health care. So if he's not addressing the issue of those of us who are trying to live with quality of life, then how do we know he's going to safely address the issue of us dying?
On the issue of disabled people, some submitted in this process and said they should be included in this because they're quite capable of making their own decisions for themselves.
Some are, but that's the problem. This bill is catered for those who are confident, who are articulate, who are able to understand exactly what the issues are. Many of the disabled do not want to end up dying. They want to live with dignity before they have that choice. They're not given the choice to live in dignity because we're severely underfunded, cannot access healthcare. I'm part of the postcode discrimination living in Counties Manukau, where I can't get the procedures I need to get within a timely fashion at Auckland Hospital. So it's a problem that we've got is what is choice? If it is free choice, how free is that choice if people are just doing it because they can't access what they need to in the life that they've got?
So what do you and this group of lawyers plan to do? What happens now?
We will take legal challenges if we need to. So it all comes down to the second reading and to see where it goes from there. But there's also around Māori and the rights of Māori under the treaty, Article 3 of the Treaty of Waitangi, and that potentially becomes a treaty claim. So we could be looking at legal challenges for a number of years.
So when you say Waitangi claim, would you take one on the basis it discriminates further against vulnerable Māori? Would that be the basis? And in terms of other legal challenges?
I haven't explored it personally myself much further, but there are legal challenges internationally and we will probably be following. And part of that problem we've got, again, is if you limit the criteria to one group, exclude others, under our human rights law, we can't have that type of disparity. So there's going to be a problem where some disabled are going to say, I want the right to die. And they're going to come on board and say, but I'm not terminal. What's happened internationally is you've got people with depression, diabetes, already being euthanised. You've got people who just say, I'm old.
I'm just going to... I need to ask you for clarification there, Dr. Hickey, because I did those list of conditions, like, for example, diabetes. Has someone seriously been euthanised who has diabetes and that been the primary reason for them being allowed to kill themselves?
Belgium, yes. You don't need that reason. You only need to be old. You only need to be a child these days. There's also Canada is currently looking at mature minors and not informing families until after they've been euthanised. So yes, it is happening. You don't need a medical reason to go to Switzerland and end your life.
Because David Seymour would say to that opposition to this bill is coming from a small, well-organised, vocal minority, and that some of the conditions being listed, like diabetes, rheumatoid arthritis, cystic fibrosis, would never pass the test for this.
Let's look at international law. Let's look at where they have actually enacted. In Belgium, it took 22 years to include children and non-terminal cases. It's already starting to happen in Canada, where it's only taken 2 years, and they're now exploring that. So we cannot say it will never happen. There's no such thing as never in legislation. Once you let government get involved, once the state is involved, once all of those start to take over, there are changes to the law. It will be extended. It will be guaranteed to be extended because you cannot make it an entrenched piece of law. It won't happen.
Are you a small vocal minority who is flying in the face of the majority?
Given that over 90% of those submissions were opposed, and they're not all religious people, I would say no.
David Seymour.
But not everyone's vocal.
David Seymour would say that a number of those submissions were rote submissions, and they were from religious groups in the large, he would argue.
He would, because that's his way of trying to dismiss and diminish the reality of what's happening here. There are a lot of non-religious people that also submitted. I'm one of them. I don't do this based on a religious belief because I don't have one. I do it based purely on human rights and my experience and work with people that are disparate and face huge disparities and vulnerability within our health sector. The disability sector are one of those groups. Some within our sector, ironically, they happen to all be white. People have all said that they would like the choice one day, and it's for things like osteoarthritis. It's not for terminal illness. I've got osteoarthritis. It's a ridiculous thing to want to die over. If you've got adequate pain relief, you can get adequate treatment for it. But people are talking about wanting to die because they're not living a good life now.
And that's Dr. Huhana Hickey.